Hello YouTubers, this video will cover Through Nights TN12. This is the 2014 edition in neutral white. Did arrive in this pretty much now standard cardboard style box that has the barcode, the edition, their company name, a picture of the light itself on either end, and that's about it. Within there were two spare O-rings, and hiding underneath the cushion you have a holster that has no quick release, just a permaloop. Oh, two more O-rings. A wrist strap, and more O-rings, plus a spare tail cap cover. So covering off on the specs really quick, it has a max output of 1050 lumens via its XML2 U2 emitter. Its working voltage of 2.7 to 9 volts. It does have reverse battery protection, and there are 4 levels which you could read for yourself there. It does feature HA3 finishing, ultra clear glass with AR coating, and the smooth reflector. Max beam is 218 meters, IPX8, water resistance although no depth, max of 66 days, I assume that's on the Firefly mode, and impact resistance to 1.5 meters. So digging into the light itself, starting off at the business end, you do see there is no stainless steel bezel, it's just pretty much the head itself. There is an AR coating on that lens as you can see there, and there you can see the very smooth reflector with the XML2 emitter at this core. And here's a close-up shot of that. The head of the light does feature these grooves as well as some heat fins right there. So the last size switch light that I tested from Through Night was actually their TN11S that featured it on the tail cap side. This one goes more of the traditional route with the size switch at the throat. Now in spite of the size switch, this does not actually have any current draw in the off state because of this physical mechanical on-off switch here that acts as a master switch. So once this is cut off, this size switch will not receive any power at all. Thus, there is no concern with any current draw, plus not to mention the tail guards plus the combination of the mechanical size switch does help prevent accidental turn on. Not that it's impossible, but of course if you want to just be extra sure, just give it a quick twist to physically lock it out. There are anti-roll rings carved into the head itself. Not the greatest, although of course that clip will probably do a better job of it. The entire head comes off of the body as one solid piece. And you can see there is a spring there, so you could use flat top cells. It does come with a stainless steel clip already pre-installed. And within the main body itself, there are these grooves, as well as this finishing, although to be honest with you, it's fairly smooth and doesn't really contribute much in the way of grip. Maybe the tail cap a little bit, but the body itself is fairly smooth in my opinion. And the tail cap does feature these flare guards with attachment points for the wrist strap, and that is a forward clicky switch at the back there. The tail flares do allow for tail standing, albeit not the most stable as you can see there. But in a pinch, it'll work. The tail cap side does also feature a spring as well, so it does help with recoil in case you want to get this gun mounted. Those two springs do have a good range, so it allows the installation of my shorter cells, which is these AWIMR at 64.9 millimeters, as well as ThorFire 3 amp hour batteries at 69.6 millimeters. However, just one thing as I always like to highlight with any flashlight is with the strong rebound rate of the springs, especially in consideration that you're using a longer cell, that only increases, right? As you're coming towards the very tail end, just be mindful of applying some back pressure to the tail cap so that way you don't damage the threads as it's backing out. And here we're going to test the reverse battery protection. Here I have a moly cell with the positive end going towards the tail. Go ahead and turn that on. You see it doesn't turn on. Okay, put back that in the correct way, and voila, no issues. Now apparently this light has gone through a few iterations, although I haven't tested any of the previous versions. This is the first one, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken already, there is a 2015 version. I think that one just features a stainless steel switch. There may be other modifications, but I haven't kept up to date with it yet, so I'll throw that into the comments section. And that pretty much covers the main features of this light. In terms of the overall size, the TN12 does run roughly mid-pack compared to some of the other 18650 size lights. However, because of the fact that it's not a turbo head like its brother, the TN11S or Credolant V9, or even Nitecore's P25, Nightwalker's NWK 601, it does have a overall streamlined profile as with the Maverick M18 or the Xeno S3A. So overall, I would say it's a petite form factor in the 18650 size category. In terms of the handling portability, given that it's not a turbo head, it makes it much easier, right? So It could probably fit into most pockets, of course, a reasonably sized large one, that a turbo head probably couldn't. So, case in point, it's a standard Tumi messenger bag. Get a turbo head light. It just barely makes it, but of course, this is a longer light as well. However, just to highlight the fact that, given its overall size, it's fairly easy to carry around. You have a better chance of slipping this into your back pocket as opposed to, again, one of these turbo head size lights. Makes it much more difficult. Handling wise, I love the fact that you could easily switch around the output in the underhand carry. However, one thing I've noticed in the overhand mode, because of these tail guards, your thumb will always be in this particular position. That affects the easy ability to change the mode because it's actually over here. So they don't quite align very well. Obviously, everybody's hand size comes into play here, but overall, I think everyone would be more around this range as opposed to all the way down here. Another thing is that you would also need to be cognizant of where you put this clip because it does kind of either impede or affect your grip because of the fact, again, of these tail guards here. While there isn't a tactical ring, there is just enough of a lip here, a flare, at the end of the tube, so that way you could kind of, use it in a makeshift cigar grip mode. I think more so resting your finger at the edge here, but it's not the most comfortable way to use this light though. Alright, I finally got my new Sphere Scientific NIST calibrated light meter. This is the 840022C, and currently I have it set up in the 4K range. Did some testing before, and it seems like this should be accurate because I've always felt that my HD 450 was under measuring, and this one does seem to be pretty much in the ballpark. The setup will be like before. This is going to be recorded at 4 meters, and the current exposure is locked at 1/60th of a second f2.8 in direct sunlight with a flat profile on a Nikon D750. So that way it should give a much better capture of the overall light, including the spill, not so much the hotspot since that's usually a lot easier to capture, but the spill as well. We're going to start off as usual with the Xeno G10 V2, and one slight change I'm going to make is that I actually have a sheet printed out with what well, it's not going to focus because I have it manually focused over there, but I do have a list of what I anticipated to be the lux at 4 meters. I'll give a rough estimate using my stopwatch, but in post-editing I have the benefit of just being able to time the exact seconds. I usually take the max reading between 30 seconds and 2 minutes as per NCFL1 standard. So without further ado, let's start with the Xeno G10 V2 first. So for the Xeno G10 V2, I last captured this at 345 lux on the old HD 450 meter. And even before the 30 seconds, which is coming up upon soon, it is well into the 460 range, as you can see there. So again, I'm not going to call it out because I don't have the exact time at 30 seconds to 2 minutes, but here you can see it's still well into the 460s there. Hold on, depending on where I aim. I saw 466 flash there, even though this is well past 30 seconds now, but still within 2 minutes. So far it seems like it's reading way higher. I mean, the last time I captured at HD 450, even at 4 meters, which I calibrated down, I had confidence that it was consistent, even though I brought down the meters from 5 to 4, and that was 345 lux. Now I'm capturing it, like I said, around above 460 range. Now I do have a few comparable lights since I'm going to measure the Quinlan T01 on Iniloops, which should anticipate 10K candela range. So I'm going to match it up against the Thorfire VG10, which has 11.2K candela, as well as ThruNight's TN12 neutral white version, which should be around 11.88K candela because they didn't provide the max beam intensity, but rather just the beam distance, so I calculated that back. So for the Quinlan T01, I'm actually going to use this in the constant current mode, because in regular mode, it's not sustained, nor is it constant current. It's actually PWM, but of a very high frequency, as I had previously mentioned. So I'm going to wait for this to get to 30 seconds. So if this is at 10K candela, I'm anticipating a max peak beam intensity of around 625 lux at 4 meters. But here you can see way past 30 seconds, I'm well above that. I'm still in the 770 range or so, give or take. There you go, 778. I mean, I have no reason to doubt this miscalibrated. As a matter of fact, I think it was done very recently, back in September, because typically they do it right before they mail it out. So the certificate, I think, is valid for like 2 years. It's pretty cool. 7 something range. Next up, we have Thorfire's VG10. And Thorfire had said it was about 200, they claimed 280 meters, but yet they provided 11.2K candela, which doesn't jive because that actually translates down to 212 meters. But regardless though, the peak beam intensity in terms of lux that I'm anticipating should be around 700. And looks like I'm just a little bit under that. The 612 range, 610 range are about there, 614 I just saw. All right, now we have ThruNight's TN12 2014 edition, but in neutral white. So typically they always say that neutral white's a little bit lower compared to the specs they provide. They claimed 218 meter beam distance with a peak beam intensity of 11.88K candela. So I'm anticipating 743, and here at 30 seconds, a bit below that. So about 600 range. I don't know how big of a drop neutral white causes, but again, this is what I'm getting. I saw about 604 there just now. I've now swapped over the Quinlan T01 to a AW IMR. Unfortunately, this is the only 14500 cell that I have that fits. I'm going to do the same test. I gave it like a minute or two to cool off after the nickel metal hydride run. So just to keep things fair, this is now supposedly at around 20K candela. And I'm going to use it in constant current mode again. And I would anticipate 1250 lux at 4 meters. Just wait to the 30-second mark. Next up, we have Nitecore's P25. This is the original version with the XML U2 emitter, because I've now noticed they now have an XML2 T6 emitter. And this was also supposed to be around 20K candela. And I'm also anticipating about 1250 lux at 4 meters. Let's wait for 30 seconds. All right, it looks like I'm a little above that. I'm somewhere around 1300 range. Again, I'll put into caption what is the max. Now we have ThruNight's Lynx. This is supposed to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 24K candela. So I'm anticipating somewhere around 1500 lux at 4 meters. Gotta say, overall, I'm very happy with this new light meter. It's come close, at least in terms of reading, for a few of these models now. Just waiting for the 30-second mark. Okay, just about there. So this is around like 1430 range. Of course, I'm holding this in a kind of like an overhand grip, so I'm not exactly, don't have the most steady hands, because I'm using the constant on push button to make sure I don't capture something erratic versus the program mode, in case I miss the max output on the program mode. Last but not least, we have PowerTac's Hero. This is actually a 26650 size light, and they had claimed 30.625 well, actually, they claim 350 meter beam distance, which should translate into 30.6K candela around there. So I'm anticipating 1914 lux. But just like this first time I measured it, even with the HD450 At 5 meters, I was just nowhere near that manufacturer claims, so this is quite a bit below. All right, past the 30-second mark. I'd say it was around the mid 1300s, but again, I'll put it into the caption what it was. So taking a look at the TN12's runtime, I started off actually with the first test was on their 3400 milliamp hour batteries, and these were 4.2 volt, a single cell at the beginning of the run, and the final at the end of the run it was around 2.9 volts, measured pretty much right after the run, so that was pretty fresh. On a single cell, it was able to hit off, I think, somewhere around 920-ish or so. The neutral tends to be a little bit lower than the cool white, so I assume the 1050 was actually the measurement for the cool white. But anyway, it's not too far off. It's like, what, 10% differential roughly? But the point is that at 30 seconds, I measured 893 lumens. And this was able to generate a run of up to roughly over 2 hours. So that actually bested the 1.5 hours runtime. Of course, at the time that they did this, who knows what batteries they're on. I highly doubt it was their 3400 milliamp because I don't think that was available at the time. But regardless though, it did meet the claims of 1.5 hour runtime. Now, the ambient room temperature that I captured was 69 degrees Fahrenheit. The start of the light was actually 73. That was measured at the last rung of the heatsink fin. And it got actually as high as 140 degrees because, as you can see here, it tried to maintain the light in regulation in this semi-quasi regulated mode. So right at this point, you can almost see here, let me actually blow that up a little bit. It's almost as if it attempted to boost a little bit to stay in regulation, then finally fell out and it started having a steady decline. So right here, you see it attempted to boost, and that's when the temperature climbed dramatically and then tailed off along with the run. Now over here towards the tail end of the run, you see this little dip here. This was actually due to the low voltage warning light, which I cover here. I'm nearing the end of the TN12's runtime testing, and as you'll see right there, it blinks a few times very quickly to indicate that the battery is now very low. But since I'm recording this in 5 seconds interval, it didn't always catch it, but the point is that it does do it pretty frequently to let you know you need to change the cells out. Now this curve is very similar to their older TN10, TN11 lights in that it does this, semi-quasi regulated mode. But I do recall though, I believe on the TN11 with 2 cells, it did maintain a perfectly flat regulated run. But my cells, unfortunately, is 2 older, AW16340 size cells. They're not really that great anymore. So I suspect that that's what contributed to this particular run. It didn't really maintain perfect flat regulation. It did also start off at about 920 range and it just started dropping, but it did match 893 lumens at the 30-second mark. And over here, sorry, I forgot to cover this earlier. Now, for the entire average run, that is, this start into the 10% output, it averaged about 551 lumens. So that's what you could expect. If you kept the light on straight up, that's your average 551 lumens throughout the entire run. Now with the 2 AW16340s, given it's such a short time, and like I said, probably due to bad cells, it only lasted, about 14 minutes before it finally just died out. And that averaged 832, but with the caveat that, again, it just didn't maintain that for very long. So in terms of the temperature, it's roughly about the same, but because it just wasn't able to maintain the boost, the temperature max reach was about 119 degrees there before it finally just cut off and died. So overall, the takeaway message is that the neutral white is a little bit lower in output compared to the cool white version, but not by too much. Like I said, it was roughly about 10% differential. And in terms of the cells to be used, well, again, if you were able to get 2 quality 16340 or maybe even true 18340 cells, I actually had some 18350s. Those were way too long, so that didn't work. But if you had true 18340 cells, those would probably work here. If I do happen to get new quality 16340 cells, I'll look to rerun this future just to see, again, if that boosts the output. On the older TN10 and 11, it did, but it wasn't too much. It was like, say, I can't remember, but same thing, roughly about 10% differential. But the only plus is that it did give like a perfectly flat regulated run before trailing off. The UI of the TN12 is fairly straightforward in that, as I had mentioned, the rear forward clicky mechanical tail cap switch acts as a master on-off switch. In its off state, it doesn't matter how many times you press the side switch or press and hold it, it would never turn on. With the switch on, I now have this in Firefly mode. There are 5 fixed output modes. There's a Firefly. A quick press will cycle it up to the next mode, which is low, then medium, high, and last but not least, turbo. All of these modes are always memorized, so case in point, I have this in low right now. I'm going to remove the tail cap switch, simulating a battery change, switch it back on, and as you can see, that mode is memorized. To access the fixed rate strobe from any mode, press and hold the switch until that fixed rate strobe is engaged. And to disengage it, it's just another press off. Or another alternative is that in the strobe mode, just shut off the master tail cap switch. Then when you re-engage it, it'll go back to the last default fixed output mode. And that's pretty much it. As I said, very nice and straightforward. As for its neutral tint, overall I would say it has a greenish hue to it as opposed to the creamy neutral white of this Prometheus Alpha Series XM18B. This one, actually, I can't recall the specific tint or the ANSI white grade, but to me, I feel like this just simulates sunlight a lot better than, say, the neutral version of this, and even more so than their headlamp, which has just a ever so slightly more greenish hue than their TN12. I do have this locked on fixed exposure as well as sunny white balance, so this comes fairly close to what I'm seeing in real life, if perhaps just a teensy bit cooler. Though comparatively, the XM18B has a slightly larger head, but it does come with a boom reflector, so it gives it a very nice smooth beam pattern, whereas the TN12, despite its small size, was still designed more towards throw with that ultra smooth reflector. So case in point, here are the two beam profiles side by side with the flashlights pretty much equidistant from the surface. So as you can see there, the TN12 has a much tighter hotspot and overall spill, whereas the XM18 beam with its boom reflector has a much smoother hotspot transitioning out to its corona and spill. As an initial conclusion, I gotta say this is another solid release by ThruNite. The overall build, fit, and finish remains pretty much to their standards. That is to say, fairly darn good. Excellent. The side switch gives a nice tactile feedback, and I really like the fact that the UI is straightforward and simple in the sense that access to the hidden strobe is via press and hold as opposed to double clicking, because now I could transition through the modes as fast as I want without worry about accidentally invoking the strobe mode. And case in point again, so it's a press and hold and another press to disengage. It's great that it has the memory mode, so it retains whichever last setting you last put it into. The beam is super blue right now because I do have this custom white balance set to the fluorescent light to light the scene. But getting back to the light, I like the fact that the driver can accommodate a wide range of voltage. It was like 2.8 through 9 volts. The problem with that though is that while it offers more flexibility, the drain is far too low for a standard lithium-ion cell. Although the newer cells can be drained pretty low, but still, 2.9 volts, you're really pushing it towards danger zone. So unfortunately, there's really no way around that because it was also designed to take primary lithium cells. In that case, it's best to just completely drain out those cells. So yes, going down below 2.9 volts would be ideal for those lithium cells, just not for lithium-ion cells. If I had some minor quibbles about the light, it's that this clip, the position, it makes it just a little bit awkward to easily clip on to a pocket or whatever you would like to clip it onto. I just felt like if it was a little bit longer and the mating surface was perhaps over here, just not behind another groove, it would have made it a lot easier to put on. But it does have a fairly strong spring rate to it, so I don't feel like it would easily come out. And the other nitpick would perhaps be, again, just tail guards. I've just never been really fond of this particular style. Looks-wise, subjectively, I guess it looks pretty cool and stuff like that, tactical, whatever you want to call it, but it just, again, impedes your thumb and forces you into a fixed position. Couple that with the fact that this machining was not aligned to this, your other digits would not easily be able to operate that side switch when using it in an overhand mode. The fit and finish, as I said, is excellent. I have absolutely no qualms in terms of the build quality. Laser engraving all nice and solid. The anodizing was all flawless. I didn't note any specific flaws with it, even especially on these corners. All these edges are fully nicely deburred. The texture on the tail cap is reasonably good. I mean, it's not the greatest. It doesn't provide the most traction, but it's good enough. The overall style subjectively is a little on the stay side. I just think it's, pretty straightforward, right? It's a tube, got a side switch, got a mechanical tail light. There isn't really a lot in the way of aesthetics. So that would perhaps be the only other quibble about that. And I guess the choice of the neutral tint, again, this borders more closely to a slightly greenish hue versus a true, what I would consider true neutral. As covered earlier, this light has already since now been replaced by the 2016 version, so it's kind of moot picking upon these things. But again, it's just something for you to consider if you are, in fact, still seeking a 2014 model. So overall, I gotta say, it's pretty good effort by ThruNite. I don't know what the difference is between the 2016 versions, but as I had mentioned, those little quirks and stuff like that, I would like to see them improve upon. As part of FTC disclosure, the ThruNite TN12 was provided by ThruNite for review. Thanks again for watching.